Um, Moving to our next presentation here, we'll have one more presentation, then take a short break before we kind of finish out the day with the last few items that we have. But I want to introduce our next presenter, Peter Murray. He'll be presenting on active, inactive, or retired. What's the status of my asset? And Peter is the lead metrologist at Scientific Protein Labs. He's spent 13 years in metrology, working at Pfizer, Sigma Aldrich, and Scientific Protein Labs since 2016. He was the project lead to upgrade into Blue Mountain RAM. Their project began in February 2019 and go live was April 2020. So welcome, Peter. Thanks for joining us and presenting today.
Thank you. Thanks you, Drexel and Savannah, both giving me the opportunity. Let me share my screen. Okay. Again, just some background on me. Drexel really kind of summarized it. My history goes back 22-year U.S. Air Force veteran. I was a munitions specialist, dealt with missile testing early on. Got out, got my time in, and started to pursue a career more in the electronics field, and have luckily or fortunately been in the pharma field now for about 13 years. Okay. Today, just want to give you some background on what we found, or what I found when we were some of the differences that we had from our old Calaman 3 and jumped all the way into RAM revision 3. That was kind of a leap, to say the least. It took quite a while for us to get everything on board, but like I said, we went live. We've been live now for about 5-6 months, and it's turning out well, and it's going well. Let's see. Basically, I'm going to focus today on what an asset record is, or an asset status record is, and that is what we're all familiar with. When you open up an equipment, you see the status field. You have active and inactive. Basically, you're changing status. And we found out early on that we figured that we could monitor the status of our assets. And reason for that is we have one division at SPL where it's a specialty products, and they have campaigns, and these campaigns rotate in and out of the same manufacturing spaces. Okay, so we might have a couple of systems or some assets. When they get ready to start up that campaign, we would bring those assets back into what we call active mode and complete all the work and get them going. And then as soon as the campaign was finished, we would basically click them off or turn them into inactive. This is basically how we did it in Calaman. Was just a pick list. Crude, but it did work. But it wasn't without any faults. If, for instance, a technician or somebody did not click this pick list over, it wouldn't show up as being due in our crystal reports, and we could potentially miss a needed calibration or needed work. So it wasn't without its faults. So when we got into RAM, we started doing development, we noticed, oh, we have this same field. Early on during the development, it was discovered that yes, work could still be generated regardless of what the asset record status indicated. Okay, If this was inactive, work can be generated, events can still, and schedules are still active. So in effect, RAM, the asset record status is totally independent of what you are doing with your assets. Okay. Basically, the way I like to I explain it to our folks is when you move this over to inactive, you're essentially putting a key in the door and allowing you to change just what you see on the screen. Okay. And then when you e-sign it, put it back, you're kind of closing the door, locking it up, and then your digital record stays as is. Okay. So we kind of had to modify, or we have to identify now, how are we going to ensure that no false work or false work records get done. And basically, I'll go to our application. You see we have two pressure indicators here. One's active, one's inactive. One's actually part of a system and one's not. And you'll also notice that they're very close or very similar in their ID numbers. So this can lead to, and it has led to, somebody just opening up the wrong record, having a bad day, and completing work on the wrong record. And then we have to do a lot of backwards figuring out. It could potentially lead to a quality action too. So what we modified or what we agreed to do locally is if we want to make this, say this asset is now being put to sleep, we are not going to, this is part of a campaign. We want to now essentially put it to sleep. And the first thing we do, of course, would be to change the status to inactive.
Hey, Peter, are you sharing a different screen or are you still sharing the PowerPoint?
Different screen. Can you?
We're still looking at the PowerPoint.
Oh, you are? You see it now?
No, I still see the PowerPoint here.
Still see the PowerPoint. Okay. See if I can.
PowerPoint stuck in presentation mode, which is always kind of hokey. It'll flip the presentation to what's being shown versus what you'd expect.
Okay.
Escape out of there.
Oh, now I see Keith.
There I am.
Now represent so you can share the screen.
There we go.
There it is.
So what we're picking up, thanks Keith. So picking up what we do here locally is we put the asset record status into inactive, okay? And then we would go into our schedules, and depending on locally, if we know that we're gonna push this out, if it's gonna be idle for 3 months, we can edit our due date. Or if our operations is telling us it could be indefinite, we have that option built in to actually just delete the due date so that it just doesn't show up even in a schedule query down the road. And then we would also open the event, and then we would change the status of the event status to inactive, which gives us that level of protection. Should somebody else come along and try to accidentally open up work, we would get an error message, or the technician would say, you know, your event is in a state that you can't use it. And so it's just a level of protection that we put in. And now it's a better representation, or it's protecting the asset from having any false work done to it. Okay. And then, of course, if we're coming back online, we get operations is telling us we want to bring it back online. We'll open up the event, make the event active again, and then schedule the work accordingly. E-sign this back into active. And
I hate to interrupt you again, Peter, but I think we're still stuck on the query screen. So I don't know if you're showing any of the asset records that have been opened, but we cannot see those.
Can't see those. Okay. Well, I'm hoping, I don't know why you're getting that, but
When you share in Zoom, make sure you share your screen as a whole and not just the application. I think that's what happens.
Yeah, I was just going to chime in, Keith. Share your desktop, not just the specific application.
One other thing, Peter, when you open up a form, it must be on another screen, so you need to move it back to the screen where you see Blue Mountain. So just drag your form when it opens up back to the screen over the top of Blue Mountain where your mouse pointer is now on that record.
okay.
So as you open the record up, open one up, it'll open up in another window. Just bring it back over to this window here where you're looking at, where you're pulling up the record.
Yeah, I'm not, I don't have
That's
that
if you-
capability.
Yeah, that's
I'm on-
if you're using multiple monitors.
I'm not on multiple.
Yeah, but I think what it is, if you unshare your desktop and reshare again and just make sure you share everything. No, we won't see it. We'll only see what you show us, obviously. But the problem is when you just share the application, the new windows that pop up won't show.
Everybody see that now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So we've got our asset now put back into active. We've got everything generated. We're going to add our work accordingly. And we'll complete the work and we are ready to go. Okay. So the nice thing about this is once we complete the work, it's already coming back on schedule. And make sure that we're doing it for all the events. Like if there are multiple events, this one only has one event. But if you have a calibration, maybe if a piece of equipment or a system's been down offline for a long time, it might require revalidation. So you're gonna have to go through all the events and subsequently restart those as well too. Once we, the same thing kind of applies when we're, if I can share the screen again, get you back going. Okay, same thing applies to when we're retiring a piece of equipment. Pieces of equipment fall out, can't be repaired. It's a very, very similar effect. We're going to open the asset, move it into retired, and then e-sign it, right? The other thing about this is RAM doesn't automatically just retire your asset. We also found that it is possible for an individual to come along and generate work on a retired piece of equipment, and that's kind of hard to explain. So same thing, concept there is you want to get into your events and make your events inactive, and in this case you more than likely want to delete your due date just so that it doesn't show up in a subsequent query, right? So we did find out that it's probably not also, you keep the event, but you can retire the asset, okay? All right. The other thing we found out too is if you delete the event on a retired asset, it tends to, especially if it's a shared event, it can orphan a few things. It can orphan your work, or it can kick it over to private. It was highly recommended, or I tell my folks, hi guys, don't delete the event. If you have a broken piece of equipment, just retire it, delete the due date, and make the event inactive. That way we still can maintain some kind of history, or we're still maintaining a visible history. Okay. So the other concept, or the other nice thing about RAM, is we can actually archive this. So archiving is a nice, simple way of moving this asset over into a kind of a hidden field where your technicians or somebody just can't even, it's not even visible. The archive section also is a view-only concept where no additional events, no work can be assigned to it. It's a nice hidden spot. It's a place that you can, if your asset or your system or your piece of equipment is truly in suspension mode, you can park it there, and then you can unarchive it and bring it right back in from where you left it. All the events, all the work ports right over, and that comes in very handy. That was a very nice concept that we enjoyed very much. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, archiving is only certain user groups can do this, so it is protected by certain user groups or certain user rights. So no one can just, you can assign those rights to whoever is doing the work. Okay. So basically, in summary, it's real easy. Keep in mind that the asset record status in the asset does not truly indicate what you are doing with your equipment. Okay. The asset record status is just a method by which you can change or modify just the local equipment record. Okay, there's just a disconnect. There's not a true representation of what you're doing with your assets. Okay. That's really about it. I kept it kind of short and sweet. Any questions? I apologize for the technicals. I thought I had 2 screens, but
No
I have a
problem.
question, Peter.
sure.
So when you said you opened your asset up and you went to your event and made it inactive, so do you use shared events or only private events? Private events would be the only way that method would work in my logic of understanding, but let me know what you think.
Yeah, currently we are only using private events. We are not setting up any shared events. It's just our choice of just how we set things up when we started going.
Another comment, which on assets that are retired, you can talk to tech support. There's a way to modify the rules so that no one can add work to a retired asset from out of the box. I don't know if yours is a customizable site or not, but R3 customizable, you can change the rule so that is not allowed. Maybe that'll be helpful.
Right, we had that rule modified. That work rule was put in place just prior to our go live. We worked with our project manager and we said, hey, we'd like to have, if the asset record status is truly retired, please kick out, don't generate any work. So yes, we did have that put in.
You have a couple of questions that have come up here. The first here is, can you query all archived equipment? I
don't think you can. I've never tried it, but I don't believe you can.
Yes. So on your query window that you have there, you see where that little yellow folder is at the top. Click that one. That's your archive. Yeah, click that. That's your archive.
Okay.
But you can't open the record. You have to bring it out of archive to use it.
Right. You have to this icon down here lets you know if you're in archives.
Yeah, all work history stays with the asset and everything, even an archive. You have to unarchive it to see it, but it stays with it.
Right. The one thing I remember at the last minute was if you are unarchiving, you're bringing your system back to life. It does, of course, it ports all the schedules and due dates back in. So keep in mind, if something's been sitting for a while and you go and initiate work, it's going to probably show up as past due.
I think it might be a good practice to clear out the due dates when you're retiring or archiving the asset.
Yes, especially when you retire. That way, it's you're just protecting yourself from somebody, poking around in a schedule query and they see, hey, there's an asset that's due this month, and they open it up and generate work, and oh no, it's the wrong one, right? Hey, we threw that thermometer away 18 months ago, and it just keeps your work histories more in tune, or without any false work histories, any misrepresentations, which could result in quality actions.
I'd like to add one more thing to Paul's statement, where I normally recommend for when retiring an asset, clearing out the due date, that you accomplish two things there. Is if the asset's ever audited, rather than removing the event, you can still show what was scheduled and what was being performed during the asset's life cycle. The other thing too is if you're using past due queries for schedules, be sure to also add in the criteria to omit any schedules that might have the due date empty. Otherwise, if you're running a past due schedules query, it might show you all of those retired assets where you have the schedules cleared out, and that's going to make it hard to figure out what schedules in that query you need to get back up to date. You can tell the schedule query to also don't look at assets that are in the retired state. So there's multiple ways to make sure if you're looking at things past due, that it's not looking at the retired asset schedules.
Correct.
Yeah, Nick, some great points. And actually, one of the questions, and now a second question that I'm bringing up. My first question is R4 going to remedy the issue when detaching an event? The historical work reflects, the event ID to be orphan. I would feel that should be a snapshot in time that shouldn't be removed and changed to orphan. I understand the linking and whatnot, but is that going to be changed, or is that addressed in R4, as well as, to your point, that query? If you're saying anything that's overdue, if it's blank, it shouldn't be overdue, so it shouldn't be caught into that query. Looking for the system to be a little smarter, that's all. If possible.
Right, and so for the query part, I guess the queries are only as smart as we design them. I think Janice might have entered a response. In R4, once you've created work for an asset, that event cannot be removed. So once there's work for it, it's there. The most you can do is remove the due date so it doesn't continue creating work, or if it's just an event you don't need at all, just send that event to the inactive status.
And there's also lots of time tomorrow to have definitely deeper discussions on R4, and certainly can carry that conversation out. A couple of other questions here that came in for you, Peter. What's the difference between a retired and inactive record? Will one status allow more edits than the other?
Well, one, if your work rule, like we had Nick mentioned, we modified our system configuration so that if the asset status, record status is retired, you can't do much to it. You can't create any work. I suppose you could add an event, but again, why would you do that? Why would you create an event if you're not going to do any work against it? In inactive, you can do just about anything if the asset record stats were active. Again, active and inactive, it's just superficial, I guess is the best term. RAM treats those two assets exactly the same. You can create events, you can create work, close out work, and you can do everything like normal as just we're active in the window.
And then the last question you have here is there a way to embed a document in a retired asset?
If you want to embed something to the work record or just to the asset record?
Just to the asset record.
I can take that, Peter. So
Sure.
So there, in the retired state, there's the ability, again, this is the best practices template for R3. I believe most, if not all, of the grids and fields are locked down. So the template would be shipped like that. So if that's the case, then, for example, if the linked documents grid is locked down, then you wouldn't be able to do that. But if that's something that you want to be able to do, say, after its final calibration, or, you know, just documentation you may collect after the fact, then really what that is just a modification of the rule that controls it to open that grid up or field up that you want to allow to be edited in that final state, which happens to be retired.
And Keith, I just to your point, with configuration, you can have retired be able to do those things, whatever you want it to do. So you can have it retired, only attachments can be modified. And that's if you want to open up to configuration. Normally what I recommend with, if you stick with the R3 best practices template, is to, if your asset is active, you know, perform your final calibration, those routine things. But as far as a RAMs set of activities to do, I normally recommend transitioning that asset back to the inactive status, so you can make those final attachments to update or to dates and add comments, and then from inactive send it to retired. The ability to go directly from active to retired is there, but only in very rare circumstances would I recommend doing that. There's normally some follow-up activity in RAM that you want to make sure is reflected in the record.
Right, and say if you wanted to attach something to a work record, same thing, back up into inactive, reopen the applicable work record, make your embedded, your attachment, re-e-sign it, and then go back and just step it forward again until everything's retired.
Well, thank you so much, Peter. We really appreciate it. Thank you for presenting this year.
All right.
You'll be joining us for the networking event as well?
Yes.
Okay, and that's so for anybody else who has, you know, more detailed questions for Peter or wants to continue the conversation, that would be a great place to do that, certainly. So thank you again, Peter. If there are other customers who are, you know, in the audience and have enjoyed our customer presenters so far today, you know, keep in mind that we're always looking for people to present at the summit, and we'd love to have anybody else in the future who wants to join us as a customer presenter. As part of our survey at the very end of the summit, we always ask, you know, if you have interest in speaking at future summits. And so, you know, please keep that in mind. If you're enjoying these customer presentations and you've benefited from that, just keep in mind that you can also certainly present, and we'd love to have you all present at future summits.